Well, thank you so much, everybody, for being here and joining us for this very first session. I have the great honor of giving the first presentation, and I am going to speak about something that I often can look right out my window right here and see, and that is magnet fishing, illicit magnet fishing. And so this is something that has become quite common during the pandemic, as people were looking for kind of pandemic hobbies they could do socially distanced. Magnet fishing kind of caught the imagination of everybody. And right from the top, I want to say that there is legal magnet fishing. Not all magnet fishing is illegal. Hobbies and outdoor hobbies and engagement with the past should be encouraged. It just needs to be done following the proper rules and guidelines. And so I'm going to go a little bit into how we can create profiles for illicit magnet fishing and to help out law enforcement in combating the illegal activity that occurs. So what is magnet fishing? This is quite new to a lot of people. It was quite new to me until I kind of saw people outside of my Oxford window kind of pulling up all kinds of things out of the river. And so magnet fishing is the process of trawling waterways with a magnet attached to a rope. You can see here one of the many Amazon products that are available online. It's become quite a cottage industry. The magnet kits are quite cheap. They're from 10 pounds to 30 pounds. They just consist of a magnet, a rope, and usually gloves. And throughout this talk, I will be focusing specifically on the UK, but it's become quite popular all around the world. So if you go just Google search or search on YouTube, you can find examples of magnet fishing in practically every country. I mean, it really is becoming a very popular hobby. The strengths of the magnets vary considerably. So kind of the smaller ones they have a lifting force of 90 kilos, so considerable. But you can buy ones just online that are upwards of over 1,000 kilos lifting power. So, I mean, absolutely incredible. And the sorts of things that people are looking for are kind of jewels and historic objects and coins and things lost in the river. But also, I mean, the really heavy ones, I think they're not looking for a car, but they're probably looking for things like safes, because there have been some finds of large safes that have been dumped by who knows who into the rivers, and the magnet fishers pull them out and try and look inside to see if there's anything of value in them. There's also quite a lot of magnet fishers that are trying to clean out waterways. And so they're going around trying to pull out old shopping carts and those sorts of things from the rivers to clean them out. So there's an environmental angle as well. But it's not without dangers, as you can see in the lower photo there, that include unexploded ordnance, drowning, all kinds of injuries from sharp things. So there have been deaths reported due to magnet fishing in the UK, and there's been major closures of big sections of cities due to unexploded ordnance being pulled out of canals and rivers by fishers and brought onto land. And then the demolition teams have to be brought in to defuse or explode these unexploded ordnance in situ. And once again, so not all magnet fishing is illegal, but certain criteria, very strict criteria, do have to be met for it to be legal. So the COVID-19 pandemic changed a lot of things for very many people. And one of the things that many people looked to do was find a socially distanced hobby that they could do outdoors. And for many people living next to inland waterways, magnet fishing became a hobby that they could do when they were permitted outside and socially distanced. So the study area that I'll be discussing is Oxford, and there was a significant increase in magnet fishing during the pandemic here. And if you just search on YouTube, you can find dozens of videos for magnet fishing in the Oxford waterways, and you can kind of see all the different sorts of things that people were pulling out of the canals and rivers during the pandemic period. And if you look on some of the advice pages for magnet fishing, you can see that primarily, almost exclusively, what they're suggesting is going to historic areas, to heritage sites. and to magnet fish there. And they're often very careful to point out that you have to follow the rules and guidelines. But the reason why they advise heritage sites is because that's where people have been for the longest periods of time. And so there's going to be the most material in the water. Now, as an archaeologist, that's highly concerning because they're advocating going to historic sites, bridges, canals, harbors, these sorts of things where we know that there's in situ archaeology. And I'll get a bit more into this later of kind of a seismic shift that's occurred in terms of underwater cultural heritage protection now occurring in areas, or now required an understanding of in areas where they haven't had those issues before. That was not a very good sentence. I apologize. And so in online forums for magnet fishing, you see people stating that they're traveling to Oxford to magnet fish in the waters here because of the city's historical significance. So very much, while there is an environmental angle to some magnet fishing, a lot of it is based on people's interest in finding historical objects. So the laws governing magnet fishing in the UK, it's going to differ from country to country, but here in the UK, there's quite specific laws, which is quite good. So permission is required both from the waterway authority and from the landowner. So if you are standing on land magnet fishing, you need permission from whoever owns that land. Now in the water, all of the inland waters, nearly all the inland waters are under the authority of the Canal and River Trust, and the River Trust does not allow magnet fishing in their waterways anymore. This is a fairly recent change, and so that's no longer allowed. There are other water authorities, such as the Port of London Authority, and they've outlawed magnet fishing in the tidal Thames. When it comes to getting permission from the landowner, most public lands you are not allowed to magnet fish from. Private lands you are, but again, it depends on what waterway you're fishing in. Now, when you magnet fish, evidently there's a lot of material that comes up that's not of interest, as you can probably imagine, the things that end up in canals. And non-disposal of those items can lead to a charge of fly tipping. I should mention that the Wiltshire police have threatened prosecution under the Theft Act if you are on land and you don't have the explicit permission of the landowner. And then Wiltshire police and some others and Essex police have mentioned the Treasure Act of 1996 and the Portable Antiquities Scheme requiring reporting. However, I need to clarify with the members of the Portable Antiquities Scheme and the people that work on Treasure Trove, the status of things in the water, because generally it has to be placed rather than kind of discard. And so I'm not sure exactly how these things fall under it. Just checking the Portable Antiquities Scheme website, there are a few items reported by magnet fishing, but not many. And so I think that is an area that needs to be clarified. And so watch this space on that. So here is a quick case study from the Oxford area. This is something that I can look out my window right here and see. So this is the Castle Mill stream. So you can see on the photo on the right, that large tower, that's part of the historic scheduled monument of Oxford Castle. It is the westernmost side, and this stream kind of forms part of a moat structure that protected the castle. And that St. George's Tower is perhaps one of the sites of some of the most important history in Oxford, including Empress Matilda, who was the daughter of Henry I, escaped from the tower across the stream in winter of 1142 during the siege of Oxford. So incredibly important moment, and it kind of shows you the things that kind of go over the edge of the castle. Not just empresses, but probably lots of material culture as well. And so that water probably is full of all kinds of interesting, historical artifacts and tells the story of the history of Oxford. So there's a lot, Oxford as an inland city, you don't often think about it in terms of underwater cultural heritage. However, anywhere there's water, there's potential underwater cultural heritage. And my own work in Italy, working in the Tiber has shown that there is, and Roman canals along the Tiber, shows that there is just a wealth of underwater cultural heritage in these waterways. And so for it to be kind of, for people to advocate the duty of taking care of this underwater cultural heritage, it's really a shame. And you can see in the map on the lower left that the castle is a scheduled monument, but the waterway is unfortunately not included within that scheduling. And this is, I should say, this is the most popular magnet fishing location in Oxford. And in the foreground of the photo on the right, you can see several bits of iron material that have been pulled up by magnet fishers and left discarded along this public walkway right here. So these are the magnet fishing sites that I've identified around Oxford. You can see quite a large spread all over the city. So there's 12 sites in total, but they all have some commonalities. And so you don't have kind of magnet fishing everywhere. I mean, Oxford is filled with canals and streams and rivers. And so if you had to patrol all of those areas to stop illicit activity, it would take up the police time. They wouldn't be able to do anything else. And obviously magnet fishing is a very low priority in the hierarchy of criminal activity. So the point of this presentation is to look into these types of sites, understand the different characteristics of magnet fishing sites and the behaviors that fishers are undertaking, and to identify the ways that, that illicit activity can be curbed. So here you see a couple different sites. So you can see a pile of bike, but there's also beyond around the bikes, lots of other ferrous material that's been kind of discarded. So this is kind of at the foot of a bridge. They've been magnet fishing off the bridge, and then they've just piled up the material there. You can see there's not very photogenic sites, right? On the lower left, it's another bridge. You can see kind of this pre-modern nail and a bike lock that have been discarded. And then in the center, there's some steps down providing access to the water, and then some piles of ferrous material up above. And then on the lower right, you have a slipway for boats, and then you have kind of piles of materials. And as the magnetic material came out of the water, inside of it were things like historic bottles. There's some bones, looks like a goat or something like that bone. So there's other materials that come out, not just metallic materials. So all of these 12 sites have certain characteristics in common, the most important being access. And so you would think that rivers are wide open spaces that provide ready access, but in fact, they do not. So the focus of the magnet fishing is on bridges, slipways, towpaths, or walking paths, that sort of thing, that provide clear access to the river. And even on towpaths and that sort of thing, there's only a few locations where you can really do magnet fishing. So you kind of have this constrained landscape where activity occurs, what we might call convergent settings that allow for illicit activity to happen. Now, I should say that it's not clear whether this activity is legal or not. But I will say this, that it's been suggested that leaving this refuse. So, I mean, all over Oxford now, you can see just piles of refuse of things that's been that have been sitting in the rivers. And it's just the scale of magnet fishing has gotten to where there's just trash all over the city. And so it's been suggested that that is illegal, though I don't believe anybody has been prosecuted for flag tipping, which is what the charge would be for that, or fined for it. And I'll also add that all of these sites are on public land, so it should not be legal for them to magnet fish on public land, though I need to follow up with Oxford Council on whether they've given permission to anyone to magnet fish on those lands. And all of the sites are under the authority of the Canal and River Trust, which have outlawed magnet fishing. So you can see I'm being very cautious by saying it's not clear whether it's legal or not. But based on the locations where they are found, it's highly suggestive that perhaps these individuals do not have permission from the landowner, from the water body authority, or to leave the refuse sitting on the public land. So these debris piles are one of the distinctive features of magnet fishing, and you see them wherever they are. And the behavior behind it is that the fishers do not want to recatch the same material. So each time they go back, they want to find something new. When they go in, they have to remove all of these uninteresting things from the water and discard them on land. Now, what's not evident here is all of the interesting things that they find that aren't old bicycles or pots and pans and that sort of thing. So what historic artifacts are they finding and keeping? What aren't getting thrown back? Now, things like this pre-modern nail is fascinating as an archaeologist. I mean, that must be something related to the castle. We don't know, but it's found in that area. Now, what else has been found that got pocketed and hopefully declared to the portable antiquities scheme? We don't know. So if we look at the spatial patterning of these magnet fishing sites, they suggest potential methods for monitoring and for law enforcement to kind of have an easier time at preventing illicit activity. So we can say that there's certain behaviors that manifest materially, and there's certain site typologies. And we can call these convergent settings, and we can predict where this magnet fishing activity will occur. And so each of those 12 sites are areas where there's easy access to the rivers, such as slipways or bridges. And that's where the activity is concentrated. And so regular checks of fishers for landowner and canal and river trust permission would ensure that legal fishing is occurring, and it would help protect the underwater cultural heritage. So while metal detecting, mudlarking, and sport diving are well established in the UK, and members have an understanding of the heritage laws, which are quite specific. So metal detecting, there's the portable antiquity scheme. Mudlarking, there's a permitting process. And with salvage during sport diving, there is my brain, I apologize. The receiver of rec. You have to declare it to the receiver of rec. These are well established, and members of these communities are quite familiar with these heritage laws. Now, on average, from my conversations with magnet fishers, they appear less familiar with the laws governing their activity than do these other groups. So there needs to be an education campaign underscoring the rules that need to be followed. And in particular, it's important that since waterways next to scheduled monuments or in historic waterways are attractive to magnet fishers, they understand the reporting requirements, and they also don't undertake the activity in places where they're not supposed to. Now, there's good value in the fact that we can identify where sites are going to occur before the crime, so they can be monitored, perhaps with cameras, that sort of thing, through understanding the access requirements for magnet fishing, but also that we can understand the behaviors after the crime occurred based on these debris piles. And so we can identify kind of where new areas are occurring. So this allows us to kind of create a profile for helping to monitor and understand any illicit activity that might be happening. And yes, just that repeats the fact that all the sites discussed occurred on public lands where there should not be magnet fishing occurring, and in waterways under the authority of the Canal and River Trust, who ostensibly have not given permission. Now, as a maritime archaeologist and one who primarily works in rivers, this has been quite concerning to me due to the significant loss of cultural heritage that may be occurring in waters across the UK. And I think that there's been a bit of a blind spot within heritage management and law enforcement due to the fact that in coastal areas, law enforcement are very well versed in underwater cultural heritage protection laws, but not in the inland areas. And so this is all quite new to many different law enforcement groups who haven't traditionally had to deal with things like the coastal groups have to. Here you have significant waterways that are an archive of a city's history that are being fished by dozens of individuals for specifically in historical areas and off historic bridges. And what's being lost is unclear, and law enforcement are not entirely sure how to deal with it. So there needs to be an education campaign, both with the magnet fishing community, as well as with law enforcement and with heritage managers, about the importance of underwater cultural heritage in inland waters. The threats to underwater cultural heritage are significant. So riverine and canal archaeology are very well developed in other countries, and they kind of point to the great potential that there is in the UK's inland waters. But there's only been a handful of excavations in canals of shipwrecks or submerged landscape features. And so there's a lot of room for growth within that area. So the potential threats are looting of metal finds that go unreported, the loss of contextual information related to kind of where this artifact was found, how it relates to, say, the castle, that sort of thing, for those that are reported. And then the disruption of site equilibrium, which is really important because these magnets may be disrupting the river bottom in a way that kind of re-exposes artifacts, perhaps delicate organics, things like that, to site formation processes that will degrade them. And while things reach a stasis and equilibrium over centuries in their context in situ, things like dragging, dredging, magnet fishing can disrupt that equilibrium and bring things back out to the surface and potentially cause damage. And while this talk is focused on our cultural heritage, there are certainly threats to the environment and individuals. We mentioned the bombs, but there are other environmental factors that by disturbing them, you could release chemicals, toxins, pollutants that were buried in the subsurface back into the water supply. And so while metal detecting, for example, is limited to the topsoil, just a few inches into the surface, it's unclear how deep of a deposit magnets can disturb. So if you're talking about that 1,000 gram magnet, how deep into the sediment can that pull out artifacts? There still needs to be more work to understand exactly the impacts that are occurring. Thank you all very much for your attention.